Edgar Winter is a classic rock musician and singer from the 1970s, 1980s, and he's still around to this day rocking the world. But he got involved in Scientology in the mid 1980s, and I was there taking care of him and his wife when they were brought up to the secret International Scientology headquarters at Gilman Hot Springs in order to record an album for Scientology and L. Ron Hubbard after his death. I'm going to tell the story about Edgar Winter and him in Scientology. Stick around. Hello, everybody. Welcome to our channel, Scientology Peeling the Onion. My name is Mark Fisher, and I'm going to tell you stories about things that happened while I was involved in Scientology in the 1970s and 1980s. And this one has to do with rock musician Edgar Winter. If you're interested in our channel and the subjects that we cover, please hit that subscribe button and hit that like button. Edgar Winter is famous as a rock musician. He and his brother, Johnny Winter, have been known for years in classic rock and blues. And he and his brother, Johnny, were born in Beaumont, Texas in the 1940s. Johnny Winter, here are the two of them there. Both Edgar and Johnny were born with as albinos. So they have very pale white skin, and their eyes, they have trouble seeing, and then of course white hair. And so it gave them a unique look, but they also were very skilled musicians. Johnny Winter was one of the great blues guitar players and rock blues guitar players of all time. And his brother Edgar, who was his younger brother, he didn't want to have to also then play guitar, so he learned other instruments, and he decided that the saxophone was going to be how he was going to feature himself, as well as on keyboards. There you can see Edgar there. He's also got a great singing voice, and there he is with his keyboards around his neck. And then, like I said, he became, and is still to this day, an outstanding saxophone player for rock and roll records, rhythm and blues, and that type of thing. Johnny and Edgar performed many times over the years. Edgar's brother Johnny unfortunately died. He became a heroin addict for many, many years, and he died years ago. But Edgar is still alive and well, and he's 77 years old. Edgar started off on his own career after the success of doing things with Johnny. And the Edgar Winter Group, they put out their first albums in the 1970, 71, 72. This is a photograph of Edgar and his group. There was Edgar Winter Group, and also he had another group called Edgar Winter and White Trash. And he had some famous rock musicians in that group. In this picture here on the far right is Dan Hartman, who later became a solo artist. And then between Edgar and Dan Hartman is Rick Derringer, who also was a famous rock and roll guitar player from the 70s, who later had a hit with Rock and Roll Hoochie Coo. Before Rick Derringer was in the group as a guitar player, Edgar had Ronnie Montrose was the guitar player for the Edgar Winter Group, who later then went solo and started the band Montrose with Sammy Hagar as the singer. Edgar's most famous album and classic album is this. This is the cover of the album called "They Only Come Out at Night." And his most famous, he had two really famous songs. One was an instrumental called Frankenstein, and the other is a rock and roll tune called Free Ride. And unfortunately, I can't play them for you here due to copyright issues, but down in the description below, I put links to Free Ride and Frankenstein in the description, so you can click on there and watch the music video there without having any kind of copyright issues. But this album sold multi-platinum copies and made Edgar Winter famous all over the world. Edgar also was the person, he invented the strap for a keyboard. This is in the 1970s. You can see he's got his keyboards across his legs with the strap around his neck. And he actually invented this, and he was the first person to do this at the time, which later became a normal thing that musicians did. Here you can see him on stage there with his keyboard and the strap around his neck. And this allowed him the freedom to move around while he was playing. Edgar is very versatile as a musician. He could play a great saxophone. He could play great keyboards. He could play percussion instruments, timbales, and just a really, really great professional musician. In the early 1980s, his career has kind of leveled off and waned. He wasn't as famous at that time, but then he started performing as a session musician on various star albums at the time. He most famously is on the David Lee Roth extended play album, Crazy from the Heat. And he plays all the saxophones and was also helped arrange the music for the song Just a Gigolo. And then also David Lee Roth recorded the Edgar Winter song Tobacco Road on this extended play album at the time. Edgar also played saxophone, for instance, on Tina Turner's hit record from the 80s, You're Simply the Best. So, and he also performed with Michael McDonald on his first solo record. So he not only is a star performer himself, but also is in great demand as a session musician, particularly during this time in the 1980s. Scientology got involved in his life around 1985. L. Ron Hubbard died in 1986. While he was in hiding during the early 1980s, he went on a writing spree, writing lots of science fiction. He wrote the science fiction book Battlefield Earth, and then he followed that up with this book here, which was Mission Earth. It was an entire series that was broken down into 10 separate titles. He actually wrote this as one long story, and it was one long manuscript, and it had to be edited by a man named Vaughn Young, and he's the one who decided how to break it up into the 10 volumes that you see here. It was released after L. Ron Hubbard's death, unfortunately, and was to make, he wanted it to be a bestseller again in the science fiction category. These are the covers of the 10 books. The first book was The Invader's Plan on the upper left. Then it was Black Genesis is the second book. The third one was The Enemy Within. The fourth book was An Alien Affair. The fifth book was Fortune of Fear. Sixth book was Death Quest. Seventh book was Voyage of Vengeance. The eighth book was Disaster. The ninth book was Villain Victorious. And the 10th book was The Doomed Planet. Now, I got to read these as well as many other people in senior management in Scientology. I was working for David Miscavige at the time at the international base, and we got actually galley copies of the book way before it was actually put out so we could read it. And I'm not ashamed to say that I read the book, and my co-host Janice Gillen-Grady, she read the book at the time too. And it actually was shocking to us as dedicated Scientologists, because the book was very depraved and included a lot of sex and sadomasochism and things like that were involved in these stories and in the books. And it was not something that we were familiar with, having been involved with Scientology and the ethics in Scientology. And a lot of people were turned off by these books and the stories that were told in them. But this was going to be, L. Ron Hubbard's return to his science fiction glory days. Battlefield Earth was the first book that was going to do that. And it was made to a New York Times bestseller. And then it was going to be followed up with these 10 books released. And they were going to be released after his death. Well, as part of his strategy for Mission Earth, L. Ron Hubbard also dabbled, and thought of himself as a great professional recording engineer as well as a musician. This is L. Ron Hubbard. You can see a picture of him here with the Apollo stars recording the album The Power of Source. And this is in the 1970s in the Caribbean. And he's there in the center with the headphones on. And if anybody's actually heard this album, it is absolutely horrendously bad. It's cringingly, nails across the chalkboard bad. The recording quality and the song quality and all that. But as dedicated Scientologists, you're supposed to tell everybody, "Oh, wow, this is really good. This is really fantastic." Here's a photograph of L. Ron Hubbard holding a guitar. And like I said, he considered himself a songwriter. And the way that he wrote songs is that he had a little keyboard with him when he was in hiding, that he would actually just sort of hunt and peck out a melody or a chorus or whatever. And then he would write the lyrics to the songs. And then he would want to send them to the musicians at Golden Era Studios to actually do the arrangements and put all the instruments together and make it into a wonderful piece of music. Here's L. Ron Hubbard goofing around with a set of drums back in the day. These photos have rarely been seen, but this again is with the Apollo stars in the 1970s, and he fancied himself a great musician. It was decided after L. Ron Hubbard died in 1986 that to release an album, L. Ron Hubbard had recorded instructions and lyrics on songs to go along with the books Mission Earth, and that there would be a rock and roll album based on his songs for Mission Earth. And he had written detailed instructions of how he wanted them arranged and the lyrics and that type of thing. Well, it was decided to find somebody who was famous who could actually record the album, and it could be put out and made into a hit. Enter Edgar Winter. This is a photograph of Edgar and his wonderful wife, Monique. And Edgar at the time in the mid 1980s was kind of in a career lull. And it was decided that he had just gotten involved with Scientology. They were living in New York City at the time. And somehow he got involved. I don't know who disseminated it to him, but he and his wife got into Scientology in New York City, and they'd gotten a little bit of Scientology processing and counseling. And they were receptive to the idea. And so they were actually recruited to do the Mission Earth album by Greg Wilhare, who at the time was working at Author Services in Los Angeles, which was L. Ron Hubbard's for-profit corporation to make money off his books and music and films and that type of thing. And they got Edgar Winter and his wife, Monique, to agree to come out to the secret location at Gilman Hot Springs in order to listen to these recordings from L. Ron Hubbard and these handwritten lyrics, and then arrange and produce an album out there. And he agreed to come out. I can remember when they came out there, because Miscavige at that time was living in Los Angeles the majority of the time, but I was in charge of his office up at the Gold Base up at Gilman Hot Springs, which meant that I basically took care of anything at the Gold Base that he needed taken care of, particularly when it involved music, movies, and that sort of thing. Well, at the time, the base at Gilman Hot Springs was not in great shape. We had to actually renovate two of the rooms down in the lodges down by the dining room area called Massacre Canyon Inn. And they were old motel units. And basically, I was charged with getting the estates people to repaint and refurbish two motel unit rooms down there, one of which was going to be for Edgar Winter and his wife to stay in. And then the second room was going to be available for any other guests that were brought in for the album. And Edgar was going to bring in his own band, because while Hubbard wanted the Golden Era musicians who were Sea Org members to play on the album, Edgar wanted some of his own band members to come and perform on the album too. So space was made for them where they could stay there. And myself and the guy who worked with me named Jason Bannock, we were responsible for making sure that when they came, that their stay went perfectly, that they were well treated and taken care of. And that's when I met Edgar and his wife, Monique. They came to the base, and they were very humble, very nice, no airs about them whatsoever. I got along great with them, and they basically, stayed in their motel room down there. And then other than that, they went up to this multi-million-dollar music studio that we built at the base at Gold, because that was going to be a recording studio, state of the art for the 1980s and also beyond, that Hubbard was going to use if he was still alive and came back to the Scientology, to the base, and was able to continue doing his different films and music projects. Well, it was state of the art at the time. It was a 48-track recording studio with a George Massenburg automated mix board. It was one of the first automated mix boards in existence. Nowadays, that's not necessary. They do digital recording and that type of thing. But at the time, it was one of a kind studio. So Edgar and Monique, his wife, they would come up to the studio, and they had a green room area, and they were fed their meals up there. And then Edgar's band would also come up to play and perform on the album. I remember his guitar player name was Billy Derby, and I don't remember the last name of his drummer, but his drummer's name was Vince. And they were both rock musicians, and they were part of Edgar's touring band at the time. And while the Gold musicians were supposed to play on the album, they were not up to the same level as these professional musicians are. In other words, the guitar player that they had at the Golden Era musicians he was not a rock and roll guitar player, and he was not good at all. And then Edgar wanted his drummer, because his drummer Vince, while a rock and roll drummer, also had incredible time. And one of the important things when you were doing recording in those days is you had to be able to play to what was called a click track, which is a metronome clock, to set the timing and set the beat for whatever it is that you're recording. And the Golden Era drummers that they had were great performing drummers, but they couldn't keep time. They would constantly go too fast or too slow. So Edgar wanted his own drummer to perform on the album up there. And I can remember on downtime in between the recordings and that type of thing, myself and Jason Bennett, we would play basketball. There was a little basketball hoop behind the recording studio, and we would play, and they worked at night, so we were up at night too. And I can remember playing at like 11, 12 o'clock at night, playing basketball with them, and we had a great time doing that. At the same time that Edgar was recording the album, he was, continuing to do Scientology services, because Greg Wilhare and Author Services and Miscavige wanted to make him more and more into a Scientologist. So Edgar, the first thing he had to do was he did the purification rundown, which is the sweat out program in Scientology, where you spend 5 hours a day in a sauna, sweating out any impurities and drugs and chemicals that may be in your body, in order to, rid you of them and the toxic effects of them. And this program has been covered for many years. You take high dosages of vitamins as well as high dosages of niacin while you sweat in a sauna, and it's supposed to have all the drugs or anything like that that's stored in your fatty tissues sweated out. Okay, and since Edgar was a rock musician, and it was decided that's what he needed to do. He did that and completed his purification rundown, and then he also got Scientology counseling while I was up there as well, doing the album. What I remember also about Edgar was he didn't drink. He wasn't drinking alcohol or anything like that, but boy, did he drink a lot of Pepsi. He liked Pepsi Cola, and he would go through 2 or 3 liters of the liter bottles of Pepsi Cola, 2 or 3 liter bottles of those a day. So he drank a lot of caffeine, a lot of Pepsi Cola, and a lot of sugar. But other than that, Edgar and his wife they were a dream to be around. They couldn't have been nicer to the staff. They didn't complain, and everything was going great. And they did the recordings of the album up there. Here's another photograph. That's Edgar and his wife, Monique. And then the album, there's a cover of the album Mission Earth. All right. And I'm going to tell you a funny story about it. Once the album was recorded, it was decided that they needed to get like a professional mixer, somebody who had hit records, to come and actually mix the album and do any re-recordings as need be. Miscavige and Greg Wilhare, they wanted a top name record producer, record mixer in order to come and mix the album. Well, at the time, this is 1986, 87. The 1980s was the decade of Michael Jackson. And who better to get than the recording engineer for Michael Jackson, who also mixed his albums, Thriller, Off the Wall, as well as did many other projects. He was Quincy Jones' engineer. His name was Bruce Swedien. And so overtures were made to Bruce Swedien, and one or two of the songs were sent to him to listen to. And he was intrigued, particularly by a song called Bang Bang that Hubbard wrote for the album that Edgar performed. And so he agreed that he would come up. Here's Bruce Swedien when he was still alive, but he decided that he would come up and he would actually mix the album and re-record anything that was needed. So he came up to the base as well, and he and his wife came up together, and they stayed in the motel room unit right next to Edgar Winter and his wife, and they started working. Bruce started working on the first song, which was Bang Bang. After about a day or two of doing the mixing on the song, it was completed and listened to by Miscavige and others, and everybody loved it. The album was being recorded and mixed in the L. Ron Hubbard recording studio, as I mentioned before, that was built specifically for Hubbard's use. Well, Hubbard did not like any kind of perfume or any kind of smells or odors in his spaces. And he trained some of his messengers to enforce that rule. Even though Hubbard had died and was no longer there, they still wanted to enforce this rule about no smells, no perfumes in his spaces. As a matter of fact, they continually cleaned his spaces even after he died so that they'd be ready for him at a moment's notice. Anyway, Bruce Swedien's wife, who came to the studio as well, wore perfume, and she, smelled like a normal woman would smell with perfume on. Well, sure enough, there was a woman in the Sea Organization who was in charge of the studio, and she confronted Mrs. Swedien about the perfume and told her that she could not wear perfume in the studio, and that it was a requirement by L. Ron Hubbard there was to be no smells or no perfume in the space whatsoever. And she basically upset this woman and disrespected her and upset her to the point where Mrs. Swedien went in to see Bruce and told him about this, at which time they promptly got in their car, drove away from the base, back to Los Angeles, never to return again. In other words, the whole thing was sabotaged because of L. Ron Hubbard's idiotic demand about perfumes, even though he was already dead. And so that basically killed Bruce Swedien working on the Mission Earth album so that it could be released with his name and his mixing acumen included as part of the album. Anyway, so that was what happened then. What happened because of that, Edgar and Monique Winter, they got upset too, and so they left and went back to Los Angeles. And Miscavige and Author Services and Norman Starkey and Greg Wilhare, they had to handle Edgar and Monique to come back and apologize for this whole flap. And of course, the person who confronted Mrs. Swedien about this, that person was immediately assigned to the Rehabilitation Project Force for upsetting, this person. And they had to recover Edgar and Monique. And I can remember that one of the things that we had to do in order to help recover him and Monique is the Gold Musicians and myself and Jason Bannock, we went down to Beverly Hills to the Beverly Wilshire Hotel to meet up with Edgar and Monique, along with Miscavige and Norman and that type of thing, and basically tell Edgar and Monique how much we love them and how great they were and that we really missed them and that we wanted them to come back. And then Edgar was given a gift by Miscavige and Author Services of a brand new Yamaha DX7 keyboard. And that actually did the trick between all of this. And Edgar and Monique returned to the base, and they finished the recording and the mixing of the album Mission Earth. This is the cover of the album Mission Earth, the CD cover. And that's Edgar made up as some space alien or warrior or whatever. And then the fist with the planet, that's part of the logo of the Mission Earth book series. And so the album was finished and it was packaged up and released. Again, I can't play any of the music on here because of copyright, but what I'm going to do is I put a link as well in the description down below for one of the songs from the Mission Earth album, and you can hear what L. Ron Hubbard, his lyrics and songs, that type of thing, what they sound like as performed by Edgar Winter. I'm going to read something to you that Edgar Winter said about L. Ron Hubbard at the time regarding his songwriting. And it says, this album's lyrics and music were written by Scientology founder L. Ron Hubbard. Hubbard is said to have left detailed instructions and audio tapes for the musicians and producers to follow when making the album. Edgar Winter described Mission Earth as, quote, both a return to rock's primal roots and yet highly experimental, end quote. Edgar also said, quote, Ron's technical insight of the recording process was outstanding, end quote. And then he also said he described Hubbard's delineation of counter rhythm and rock as something which was nothing short of phenomenal, particularly inasmuch as it had been entirely unexplored and only later heard in the African-based rhythms of Paul Simon's work some 5 years after Ron's analysis. In other words, Paul Simon's album Graceland, which uses a lot of African counter rhythms and all that. Oh, that was following L. Ron Hubbard, who was the trailblazer for this, according to Edgar Winter. Anyway, so that was basically what he said about the album at the time. The album was released, and of course, it was a flop. It did not sell 1 million copies. It didn't even sell 500,000 copies. And if you listen to it now, it's pretty much a joke. It's from its time in the 1980s. The lyrics are very juvenile, and you can listen to the songs yourself and decide for yourself. But it just is not very good at all. Now, Edgar, at that, he continued in Scientology after that. He left the base and he would perform at Scientology events from time to time. And then I left in 1990 and was no longer involved in Scientology. And we moved to Las Vegas at the time. Well, Edgar came through on tour a few times while we were living in Las Vegas. And shortly after we left, in like 1991, I guess it was, he came through on tour and was up at the Mount Charleston Resort and Lodge up in the mountains about 20 minutes away from Las Vegas. And I didn't go, but one of the drummers from the Golden Era Musicians was married to Janice's sister, Terry. His name was Fernando Gamboa, and he knew Edgar from, performing on the sessions and doing the Mission Earth album. So he decided to go up to the Mount Charleston, which is 20 minutes away, to see Edgar perform. He goes up there, and sure enough, who does he run into backstage but Norman Starkey, who's there with Edgar Winter. Norman Starkey was the head of author services. He was a longtime Sea Org member, and he was also the trustee for the L. Ron Hubbard estate. And what was Norman doing in Las Vegas with Edgar Winter up in the mountains about 20 minutes away from Las Vegas? Well, it's because we lived in Las Vegas at the time, and we had a private investigator who had infiltrated our company, our lives, named Dave LeBeau, and he obviously told Author Services and Miscavige and the Scientology people that Fernando planned on going up to see Edgar up in the mountains. So Norman came along and tagged along up there to prevent Fernando from seeing Edgar Winter and talking to him. And Fernando was just going there to enjoy the concert. He wasn't going to do anything. And he saw Norman. He said, "Hey, Norman, how's it going?" And then just kept right on walking. But then we did go see Edgar, I think a year or two later. He came and he performed at the Rio Hotel and Casino. And we went, and we didn't want to disturb him, but we went and saw his show, and it was a great show. He's really a fantastic vocalist, a fantastic performer, and he can play a saxophone like nobody else. We really enjoyed that show, but we didn't want to cause any trouble for Edgar. We were no longer in. That's one thing about when you leave Scientology as a Sea Org member, and when you got into a high position like where we were, we didn't want to make any waves. We didn't want to cause any trouble for people who were still in Scientology, because at that time we hadn't really peeled our onion, and we didn't want to get anybody in any trouble for talking to us, even though we were out and knew what was going on, because we at that time thought like, oh, it'll get sorted out, Miscavige will get kicked out, and things will get smoothed out. That was our viewpoint at the time. So we didn't want to make any waves or anything like that. Yeah, I wanted to say the other time, though, that I did go to see Edgar Winter was in 1995 here in Las Vegas at the Bally's Hotel. He was on tour with David Lee Roth, the former lead singer and then later lead singer of Van Halen. And but David Lee Roth at the time was not part of Van Halen, and he was doing a tour where he was actually performing music like Frank Sinatra and Dean Martin and that type of thing. And here's a picture of the tour. It's a poster of the tour, and it was David Lee Roth and Edgar Winter. And Edgar was actually the band leader for David Lee Roth on this tour, and it was like a big band. Edgar was the band leader, played the saxophone and helped sing, and David Lee Roth basically he was like a song and dance man, doing, like I said, Rat Pack stuff, Frank Sinatra stuff, and all that. And it was a very enjoyable show. And of course, Edgar is fantastic. And David Lee Roth seemed to get along well with Edgar. Obviously, he liked him enough to have him on this tour. But that was the last time that I actually physically saw Edgar perform. He has since continued performing to this day. He's now 77 years old. He and his wife, Monique, they live in Beverly Hills in Los Angeles. But most recently, Edgar Winter he's been part of Ringo Starr's all-star band. There you see him there playing saxophone next to Ringo Starr. And he's been playing in that band whenever Ringo goes on tour. And he likes to get a lot of different rock musicians from different bands to play. And they play their hits as well as Ringo's hits. And here's another photograph of a recent photograph. There you see Edgar, of course, in the middle, his wife Monique on the right, Ringo Starr there on the left, and then Ringo Starr's wife, Barbara Bach. And this is all of them, and they obviously are very friendly and tight and that type of thing. So Edgar has continued to perform, up to this day at 77 years old. And I have nothing but praise for Edgar. I don't know how much he's involved in Scientology anymore. I don't know if they use him anymore at events or anything like that. Who knows? A lot of these celebrities have gone under the radar and, are very low key if they are still involved in it. Even Tom Cruise doesn't really speak out about it anymore after he got whacked 20 years ago for doing so. But anyway, I just wanted to mention that I respect Edgar as a person and his wife. They were very nice to me, very good people. And I enjoyed my time working with him and his musicians on the Mission Earth album. Now, looking back, the album is a piece of crap, okay? But at the time, we thought it was good, and that was how it went. But I wanted to share that story with you all regarding Edgar Winter, his time in Scientology, and his performance for L. Ron Hubbard and his songs on Mission Earth. I wanted to mention, if you're interested, Janice Grady, my co-host, she's written 2 books. You can actually get them. They're autographed copies. She'll personally autograph them to you. Commoner's Messenger, she worked with L. Ron Hubbard on a daily basis, 6 hours a day for many years as a teenager starting at age 13. That's book 1, and then this is book 2, and that's Janice there with L. Ron Hubbard here. If you'd like to get autographed copies of the books, just go down below. There's a tab there. You can click on it. You can order the book. You can actually write to her and tell her what you would like inscribed, and she'll autograph it and send it to you, and we can get that out to you. I hope you enjoyed this show. If you like this, please subscribe to our channel, hit that like button, hit the notification button so that you know when other videos are coming out. Janice will be back shortly, and we'll be doing some more videos together. If you've got any questions or comments about this video, about Edgar Winter, about anything, just go down below and get in the comment section. I read them all, and I greatly appreciate any questions or comments that you make. Also, if you'd like to support our channel, you can buy us a coffee. There's a link in the description below the video where you can click on it. You can buy us 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 coffees, whatever. Any money we get just goes back into the channel. And then finally, I'd like to mention, if you want to become a member of our channel, we really appreciate our members that are already members. Just click next to the subscribe button on the YouTube page for our channel. There's a join button, and you just click on that. You have to be on your PC or laptop, but just click on that. There's a short video that describes the different perks that you get, including an autographed copy of Janice's book if you become a member of our channel at the highest level. And it's just another way that you can support the channel. So if you want to become a member, please go to that, hit that join button. We greatly appreciate it. And like I said, we greatly appreciate all the people who subscribe to our channel and are also members of our channel. Anyway, that's the video for today. I hope you enjoyed this story. I've got more stories coming, and of course, more interviews. Janice will be back shortly. Until next time, everybody. Bye-bye.